Well, hello.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's so nice of you to come. I rather do miss the social interactions that I enjoyed in my lifetime. I've just been sitting here reminiscing, going over some old memories that I'd like to share with you. But first, let me introduce myself. I was born Clara Mae Brown on April 15th, 1869, to Stephen and Maria Mae Brown. I was the youngest of their 4 children. My oldest brother, Frank, headed out west in his early 20s, where he became a land and cattle dealer. My brother, Louis, followed in father's footsteps and became a lawyer. I never knew my sister, Carrie, who died at just 2 years old, long before I was born. Here's one. This is my high school diploma. My nickname was May growing up in Queensbury. I attended the Glens Falls Academy and graduated as an academic scholar of good and regular standing, so states my diploma. Courses in those days might sound strange to some of you. Along with the usual history, geometry, algebra, and English Lit, in 1885, I also studied physiology, rhetoric, history of Rome, mental philosophy, political economy, and geology. Here's me in college. As the daughter of an attorney, I was afforded certain privileges not common to girls at that time. In 1890, I was part of the 12th commencement class at Smith College with a bachelor's degree in English literature. The college was founded by Sophia Smith, who used her inheritance to assure that young women were afforded the same quality education as young men of the late 19th century. And here's my wedding photo. When I was 25, I met a wonderful and successful man, 12 years my senior. Frederick Anthony Killmer had roots in Argyle, but was born in Minnesota, lived in Chicago, and arrived in Glens Falls in 1892, where we would meet and marry 2 years later. Since my father was an attorney for the York Shirt Factory, Fred and I were able to travel in the same social circles. Fred was secretary of the Glens Falls Shirt Factory and later became proprietor of the York Shirt Factory, from which he retired. He was an active man and could often be seen riding his bicycle to work, or sometimes for sheer pleasure, which was also not uncommon in the late 19th century. Our baby girl. 3 years later, in 1897, we welcomed our beautiful daughter, Margaret Maria. Sadly, my own mother had passed away by this time, but she would live on in our child's middle name. Margaret, our little rabbit, or bunny as I like to call her, was smart, energetic, and talented. I'd like you to meet her in a few minutes, but first I want to share with you more of our journey into the 20th century. Here's our house. My father, Stephen Brown, deeded us a corner lot at Glen and Sanford Streets, and it's the place we would call home for many years to come. Overall, Glens Falls was a safe, friendly place to live, work, socialize, and raise children. It's a newspaper clipping. Social life in those days revolved around organizations, churches, and ladies' groups that met and planned events and charitable activities. I hosted regular meetings of the Glens Falls Club of College Women, and we were often written up in the newspaper as the Tuesday Club. The Church of the Messiah was another hub of activity. The Girl Scouts, whom we supported, honored me later in life with a dedication ceremony called the Blessing of the House at their Chestertown Lodge because of my donation to help create a new spacious living area there. And here we are in Manhattan. Traveling with my husband and sometimes our daughter was such a joy. We got to see so many places, including New York City and all the way to Minnesota on one excursion. Whenever Margaret couldn't join us, we would send her postcards to let her know we were thinking of her and that her mama and papa would be home soon. In those days, people frequently kept scrapbooks or put postcards in shoe boxes from their families and friends' travels, which is what Margaret did. Oh, here's one of me with my friend, Laura. Many years later, in the spring of 1932, following the deaths of many loved family members, I had the opportunity to travel throughout California with my friend, Laura Treadway. We saw many wonderful West Coast sights, traveling around in a roadster. But I might also say it was a chance for me to get away from it all for a while. Please excuse me. I need a few moments. So let me introduce you to my daughter, Margaret Maria Viele, so she can share with you some of the life she lived until cruel fate intervened.
Oh. Hello. I'm sorry. I know that my mother has always had trouble talking about a very difficult time in her otherwise very happy and productive life. So let me take that burden from her. I, Margaret Maria Killmer, was the only child born to my parents known informally as May and Fred. Following my arrival on June 6, 1897, I enjoyed a delightful childhood in a very comfortable and happy home. I was given opportunities that not every child of the early 20th century was privileged to experience. My father traveled to New York City and other regional places for work, and I was sometimes able to accompany him and my mother. Those were exciting times that left me with such beautiful memories. Of course, when I was unable to accompany them because of school, I enjoyed receiving these picture postcards that they sent me, knowing that they were thinking of me while they were away. I loved the photographs on them. Oh, like this one? This one is a lion at the Washington Park Zoo in Milwaukee. Or this one right here, Central Park in New York City during winter. Oh, and then these are from Fredonia, New York. Places like Bear Lake and Arkwright Falls. Oh, and this one's my favorite. It's a whimsical drawing of a little doggy with a bow. Isn't he cute? Oh. Mama's note said, "Dear Bunny, I was very glad to receive your letter. I'm doing fine. I hope you're all right. I sent you this little bow wow to keep you company." I would soon get my own little dog named Billy to keep me company during their absences. As I grew older, Mother began signing her notes with MBK, which stood for May Brown Killmer, a name that she'd used much more often during her later life. Father, on the other hand, he'd always write little reminders such as, "My dear little girl, be a good little rabbit. I hope you're getting along well in school. Mama sends love," or "We'll be home Monday." Oh, and sometimes they sent me new clothes, dresses, ribbons, or a coat in the very latest style. Oh, they were all such lovely presents. I kept this collection of postcards, and I am very happy to know that they were handed down and preserved by both of my namesakes, both daughter and granddaughter. Now, before I get too ahead of myself, I graduated from Glens Falls High School in 1915, and that following September, I performed in a formal piano recital for the Musical Society for Study and Criticism. And then I was able to even further my education in Tarrytown, New York. right here, at Miss Mason's Collegiate School for Girls. Oh, it was such a fascinating place. It sat on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. Oh, it was commonly called the Castle due to its stone edifices and grand tower. The school's lofty stated mission was to send trained leaders, but broad-minded but feminine young women with strong, kind, honest, and joyous spirits into the world to serve home, democracy, and God. I admit, I summarized their somewhat lengthy and detailed mission just a little bit. But the truth is, I loved the challenges and the ideals that the Mason School stood for, as well as my classmates, and especially my musical studies. Oh, living away from home was so enlightening. There were many organizational clubs, notable guest speakers, and opportunities for trips to historical and cultural places. And at age 20, I was even luckier to be able to further my musical studies at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. Those 2 years left me with such incredible memories. Oh. And when I finally returned to Glens Falls in 1920, I would meet a man that I had actually already met at a party in February of 1912, just 8 years earlier. Oh, he had just returned home after serving overseas at the end of World War I, and it wasn't very long before our courtship began. After a whirlwind of showers and engagement parties, Harold Frederick Viele and I were married that following June at my parents' home. I wore an ivory gown of satin and rose point lace. I had a long tulle veil, and I carried a bridal bouquet of sweet peas and lilies of the valley. Years later, my daughter, Margaret Elizabeth, would carry a bouquet of those same special flowers in my honor. Oh, what came to be known as the Roaring Twenties was such an exciting time to be alive for a woman. Styles in hair and dress changed drastically, which of course I loved. Silent movies and social dancing were fun, lively pastimes. Motor cars, radios, telephones all became a part of everyday life. But perhaps the biggest change was that now I and all women now had the opportunity to vote. We had finally been granted the cherished right of being fully recognized U.S. citizens in 1920. Of course, the next 10 years were just as memorable for Hal and myself as well. We moved into our own home that we built on Lincoln Avenue. We welcomed our precious baby girl, Margaret Elizabeth, into the world in May of 1925. I watched my husband and his father's drugstore, F.C. Viele and Son, become a success, and we were happily with child again as 1930 began. I'm sorry. Sadly, life comes with no promise of perfection. I know that my mother was never able to truly accept that her only daughter's ordinary trip to the dentist would end in a fall on the ice that would lead to the death of her unborn grandson, Frederick Killmer Viele, and mine as well. What happened to me in late February of 1930, when I was just 33 years old, is now something that can be medically treated in your 21st century world. And it generally has a much happier ending. But time marches on, and my baby boy and I have since been rejoined by my husband, his father, in 1966, and then my precious baby girl just this past spring. It's sad that my mother, my husband, and my precious 5-year-old Margaret Elizabeth had to live so many years without us, especially since everything had seemed okay at first, until the hemorrhage just couldn't be controlled. I know that my tragedy changed them. My beloved Hal never remarried. He hired a cook as well as a companion named Molly to help raise our daughter, and she remained a part of the family until she died, even being called Aunt Molly by my grandchildren. My mother hardened somewhat, perhaps finding it difficult to love unconditionally ever again. Her granddaughter, my little girl, she often referred to her as a very impressive, proper person. Here she is right here. Isn't she just... She's my little girl. Oh. But she was a toughie. Perhaps women in her era learned to be stoic in the face of hardships. But nevertheless, I do believe that I lived a charmed, if too brief, life. Well, it has been my pleasure to share these few minutes with you, but I know that my mother, Clara May, would like to say goodbye. She did so love to entertain, converse, and share her home with those who wish to do good in the world. We are all reunited as time passes, and I sincerely wish you all the best.
I sometimes think that life is hardest for those of us who live the longest. One expects to lose their parents, as I did, while still a young woman. But the loss of my husband, Fred, in 1926, followed by the deaths of my daughter and her unborn child, were a heavy cross to bear. Even my brothers had passed by then. I continued to support my church and the Girl Scouts while watching over my son-in-law and granddaughter without interfering too much. And as I said earlier, I did some traveling with my friend Laura too. But not long after, June 20th, 1936 to be exact, I joined my loved ones here at Pineview. I bequeathed my home and all my worldly goods to my granddaughter, Margaret Elizabeth. Only 11 years old, she had been through so much, so young. Someday she would marry and have 3 sons and a daughter of her own, another Margaret to love. But I must go now. Thank you all for sharing your time with Bunny and me. God bless.